We now come to the next statement.
You're watching BBC News. We are staying in the Commons. The Prime Minister finally there on the front bench, all rather later than advertised. The questions to Priti Patel ran over. Let's listen in to the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I'll update the House on the government's response to events at home and abroad during the Easter recess. I will come to Ukraine in a moment, since I've just left a virtual meeting with President Biden, President Macron, Chancellor Scholz and 8 other world leaders. But let me begin in all humility by saying that on the 12th of April, I received a fixed penalty notice relating to an event in Downing Street on the 19th of June 2020. I paid the fine immediately, and I offered the British people a full apology. And I take this opportunity on the first available sitting day to repeat my wholehearted apology to the House. As soon as I received the notice, I acknowledged the hurt and the anger. And I said that people had a right to expect better of their Prime Minister. And I repeat that, Mr. Speaker, again in the House now. Let me also say, not by way of mitigation or excuse, but purely because it explains my previous words in this House, that it did not occur to me then or subsequently that a gathering in the Cabinet room just before a vital meeting on COVID strategy could amount to a breach of the rules. I repeat, that was my mistake, and I apologise for it unreservedly. I respect the outcome of the police investigation, which is still underway. And I can only say that I will respect their decision-making and always take the appropriate steps. And as the House will know, I have already taken significant steps to change the way things work in Number 10. And it is precisely because I know that so many people are angry and disappointed that I feel an even greater sense of obligation to deliver on the priorities of the British people and to respond in the best traditions of our country to Putin's barbaric onslaught against Ukraine. Our Ukrainian friends are fighting for the life of their nation, and they achieved the greatest feat of arms of the 21st century by repelling the Russian assault on Kiev. And the whole House will share my admiration for their heroism and courage. Putin arrogantly assumed that he would capture Kiev in a matter of days. And now the blackened carcasses of his tanks and heavy armour litter the approaches to the capital on both banks of the Dnieper and are smouldering monuments to his failure. Having pulverised the invaders' armoured spearheads, the Ukrainians then counterattacked, and by the 6th of April, Putin had been compelled to withdraw his forces from the entire Kiev region. Britain and our allies supplied some of the weaponry, but it was Ukrainian valour and sacrifice which saved their capital. I travelled to Kiev myself on the 9th of April, the first G7 leader to visit since the invasion, and I spent 4 hours with President Volodymyr Zelensky, the indomitable leader of a nation fighting for survival who gives the roar of a lion-hearted people. I assured him of the implacable resolve of the United Kingdom, shared across this House, to join with our allies and give his brave people the weapons they need to defend themselves. When the President and I went for an impromptu walk through central Kiev, we happened upon a man who immediately expressed his love for Britain and the British people. And he was generous enough to say, quite unprompted, I should reassure the House, I will tell my children and grandchildren they must always remember that Britain helped us. But the urgency is even greater now because Putin has regrouped his forces and launched a new offensive in the Donbass. We knew this danger would come. And when I welcomed President Duda of Poland to Downing Street on the 7th of April and Chancellor Scholz the following day, we discussed exactly how we could provide the arms that Ukraine would desperately need to counter Putin's next onslaught. On the 12th of April, I spoke to President Biden to brief him on my visit to Kiev and how we will intensify our support for President Zelensky, and I proposed that our long-term goal must be to strengthen and fortify Ukraine to the point where Russia will never dare to invade again. Just as our foreign policy must look to the long term, the same is true of this government's domestic priorities. And as we face the economic aftershocks of COVID and the consequences of Russian aggression, that is above all in tackling the impact on British energy prices and on consumers and on family bills. And that's why we're spending over £9 billion to help families struggling with their bills. We're helping families to insulate their homes and reduce costs, and to end our dependence on Putin's oil and gas, and to ensure that energy is cheaper in the long term. We published on the 7th of April a new strategy to make British energy greener, more affordable and more secure. We will massively expand offshore wind, and in the country that split the atom, we will build a new reactor not every decade, but every year. This government is joining with our allies to face down Putin's aggression abroad while addressing the toughest problems at home, helping millions of families with the cost of living, making our streets safer and funding the NHS to clear the COVID backlog. My job is to work every day to make the British people safer, more secure and more prosperous, and that is what I will continue to do, and I commend this statement to the House.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
What a joke. Even now, as the latest mealy-mouthed apology stumbles out of one side of his mouth, a new set of deflections and distortions pour from the other. But the damage is already done. The public have made up their mind. They don't believe a word the Prime Minister says. They know what he is. As ever with this Prime Minister, those close to him find themselves ruined, and the institutions he vows to protect damaged. Good ministers forced to walk away from public service, the Chancellor's career up in flames, and the leader of the Scottish Conservatives rendered pathetic. For all those unfamiliar with this Prime Minister's career, this isn't some fixable glitch in the system. It's the whole point. It's what he does. It's who he is. He knows he's dishonest and incapable of changing, so he drags everybody else down with him. The more people debase themselves, parroting his...
Order! I can't hear what's being said because you're making trouble. Mr. Babrican, I'm all right. Keir Starmer. What I would say is I think the leader said dishonest. I don't think that's an appropriate word to be. I think I will make... We don't want to talk about breaking rules, do we? I don't think that's a good time to discuss. I just say, I think if he just withdraws that and works around it, I'm sure that with the knowledge that he's gained over many, many years, he can use appropriate words that is in keeping with good temperate language of this House. Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, I respect that ruling from the Chair. The Prime Minister knows what he is. And so he drags everyone else down with him. The more people debase themselves, parroting his absurd defences, the more the public will believe all politicians are the same, all as bad as each other, and that suits this Prime Minister just fine. Some members opposite seem oblivious to the Prime Minister's game. Some know what he's up to, but are too weak to act. But others are gleefully playing the part the Prime Minister cast for them. A minister on the radio this morning saying it's the same as a speeding ticket. No, it's not. No one has ever broken down in tears because they couldn't drive faster than 20 miles an hour outside a school. Don't insult the public with this nonsense. But, Mr. Speaker, as it happens, the last minister who got a speeding ticket and then lied about it ended up in prison, and I know because I prosecuted him. And last week, we were treated to a grotesque spectacle. One of the Prime Minister's loyal supporters accusing teachers and nurses of drinking in the staff room during lockdown. Members opposite can associate themselves with that if they want. But those of us who take pride in our NHS workers, our teachers, and every other key worker who got us through those dark days will never forget their contempt. Plenty didn't agree with every rule the Prime Minister wrote, but they followed them nonetheless. Because in this country, we respect others. We put the greater good above narrow self-interest, and we understand that the rules apply to all of us. This morning, I spoke to John Robinson, a constituent of the member for Lichfield. I want to tell you his story. When his wife died of COVID, John and his family obeyed the Prime Minister's rules. He didn't see her in hospital. He didn't hold her hand as she died. Their daughters and grandchildren drove 100 miles up the motorway, clutching a letter from the funeral director in case they were questioned by the police. They didn't have a service in the church. John's son-in-law stayed away because he would have been the forbidden seventh mourner. Doesn't the Prime Minister realise that John would have given the world to hold his dying wife's hand, even if it was just for 9 minutes? But he didn't, because he followed the Prime Minister's rules. Rules that we now know the Prime Minister blithely, repeatedly and deliberately ignored. After months of insulting excuses, today's half-hearted apology will never be enough for John Robinson. If the Prime Minister had any respect for John and the millions like him who sacrificed everything to follow the rules, he'd resign. But he won't, because he doesn't respect John. He doesn't respect the sacrifice of the British public. He is a man without shame. Looking past the member for Lichfield and the nodding dogs in the cabinet, there are many decent, honourable members on the benches opposite who do respect John Robinson, who do respect the British public. They know the damage the Prime Minister is doing. They know things can't go on as they are. And they know it's their responsibility to bring an end to this shameful chapter. Today I urge them once again, don't follow in the slipstream of an out-of-touch, out-of-control Prime Minister. Put their conscience first. Put their country first. Put John Robinson first. And remove the Prime Minister from office. Bring decency, honesty and integrity back into our politics. And stop the denigration of everything that this country stands for. Thank you.
Sir William, Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I apologise once again profusely to John Robinson, to all those who lost loved ones, particularly those who suffered during the pandemic. And Mr. Speaker, in my statement I have tried to explain why I spoke to the House as I did. The right honourable gentleman has chosen to respond with a series of personal attacks on me, and I understand why he does that. But I think, I understand that, Mr. Speaker, but I think it would have been a good thing if, in the course of his remarks, he had addressed some of the issues that I mentioned, not least the crisis in Ukraine, with the impact that is having on the livelihoods of everybody in this country. And it is to address that that this government will get on with our job, Mr. Speaker. It is to focus on the needs of the British people. And when he talks about nodding dogs, Mr. Speaker, I'd remind the House that there was a certain nodding dog who sat nodding in the previous Labour shadow cabinet, Mr. Speaker, that would happily have installed the honourable member for Islington North and made, I think, a disastrous mistake in the security of our country at a very difficult time. This government will get on with the difficult job of taking us through the aftershocks of the COVID pandemic, leading not just this country, but I think the world in our response to the violence that we're seeing in Ukraine. I must say that I renew my apologies. I renew my apologies to John Robertson, to families up and down the land. But I think the best thing that we can do now for this country as politicians is not to indulge in personal abuse of the kind that we've heard and to get on with our jobs.
Sir William Cash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Having heard the remarks both of my right honourable friend and the Leader of the Opposition, may I put it to the House that my right honourable friend, I'm sure, appreciates that it is crystal clear that a fixed penalty notice, such as in his own case, is a civil penalty fine, which, if paid within 28 days, eliminates future prosecution in the criminal courts, and furthermore, without any admission of guilt. In a recent criminal case, in a recent criminal appeal case, and in that judgment, it was said that if the payment was made within those 28 days, a fixed penalty notice was held not to be a conviction, as the defendant, to quote the court's judgment, quote, was not admitting an offence or criminality and would have no stain imputed to his character. That is the perspective, and that is the case.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I want to make it absolutely clear that I in no way minimise the importance of this fine. I am heartily sorry for my mistake, and I accept completely the decision of the police.
Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let us remind ourselves that on the 8th of December last year, the Prime Minister denied that any parties happened in 10 Downing Street. They are the very same parties that the police have now fined the Prime Minister for attending. By now, people know that the rules of this House prevent me from saying that the Prime Minister deliberately and willfully misled this House. But maybe today that matters little, because the public have already made up their minds. YouGov polling shows 75% of the British public and 82% of people in Scotland have made their minds up on the Prime Minister. The public knows the difference between the truth and lying.
Hear, hear.
And they know that the Prime Minister is only apologising for one reason, and one reason only. It's the only reason he ever apologises, because he's been caught. After months of denials, his excuses have finally run out of road, and so must his time in office. The Prime Minister has broken the very laws he wrote. To try and argue that he did not know he had broken his own laws would be laughable if it wasn't so serious. Prime Minister, you can't hide behind advisers. He knows, we know, that the dogs in the street know that the Prime Minister has broken the law. This is the first Prime Minister to be officially found to have broken the law in office. A law-breaking Prime Minister. Just dwell on this. A Prime Minister who has broken the law and remains under investigation over additional law-breaking. Not just a lawbreaker, a serial offender. If he has any decency, any dignity, he would not just apologise, he would resign. Yes. Mr. Speaker, the scale and the seriousness of the issues we are all now facing demand effective leadership from a Prime Minister who can be trusted. The Tory cost of living crisis and the war crimes being inflicted on the Ukrainian people need our full focus. In a time of crisis, the very least the public deserves is a Prime Minister they can trust to tell the truth. And for this Prime Minister, that trust is broken and it can never be fixed. The truth is that a majority of people across these islands will never trust a single word he says again. So the questions today are not so much for a Prime Minister desperately clinging on to power. The real question is for Tory backbenchers. Will they finally grow a spine and remove this person from office? Or is the Tory strategy to go on about standing behind a Prime Minister who the public can't trust with the truth?
Mr. Speaker, I direct the right honourable gentleman what I said earlier. I apologise profusely for my mistake and for what I have got wrong, and I repeat that. He asks about whether this government is capable of providing effective leadership during the current crisis and in standing up to Russia. And I would just remind him that I think it is still the policy of the Scottish National Party to dispense with this country's independent nuclear deterrent at a particularly crucial time. I don't think that's what this country needs right now.
John Whittingdale.
Many of my constituents are angry about breaches which happened 2 years ago, and I welcome the Prime Minister's recognition of that and his apology. But does he agree that we currently face the gravest crisis in our global security for a long time, and it is essential that we remain focused on beating Putin and stopping the aggression against Ukraine? Can he say what additional measures we can now give to Ukraine following his discussion with President Biden and others to ensure that Putin's aggression cannot be allowed to succeed?
I thank my right honourable friend, and I repeat my apologies, my contrition. But I want to say on the state of the war in Ukraine, it's at a very perilous stage, and it is vital now that we don't allow Putin to gain momentum in the Donbass as he well could, and in the east, and that's why we are stepping up our supply of military hardware, the kind that I think the Ukrainians particularly need now. This will become an artillery conflict. They need support with more artillery. That is what we will be giving them, Mr. Speaker, in addition to many other forms of support.
Dame Margaret Hodge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I see that the Prime Minister is anxious to move on to other issues, and I think the question is, can he do that? And I would take one example. Can he perhaps explain to me, to the House and to the country, how he can credibly justify, on the one hand, calling for the resignation of the boss of P&O Ferries, when he faced allegations that he broke the law, while on the other hand, refusing to resign when he himself is guilty of actually breaking the law he set.
I thank her very much, and I think that what the P&O Ferries did was entirely wrong, as I've told the House before. And I think, by the way, that I made a serious mistake, and I apologise for it very sincerely.
Mark Harper, I lost him.
Speaker, I strongly support the government's actions in standing up to Putin's aggression and helping Ukraine defend itself and our values. And it's exactly at times like this that our country needs a Prime Minister who exemplifies those values. I regret to say that we have a Prime Minister who broke the laws that he told the country they had to follow, hasn't been straightforward about it, and is now going to ask the decent men and women on these benches to defend what I think is indefensible. I'm very sorry to have to say this, but I no longer think he is worthy of the great office that he holds.
Well, I must say to my right honourable friend, I know the care and the sincerity with which he weighs his words, and I bitterly regret what has happened. I bitterly regret the event in Downing Street, as I have said. But I do believe that it is the job of this government to get on with the priorities of the British people, and that is what we're going to do.
Ed Davies.
Speaker, a poll over the weekend asked 2,000 people what they think of the Prime Minister. The most common word they used, by far, was liar. Yep. Does the Prime Minister understand how profoundly damaging it is to our great country to have a government led by a man the public no longer trust and no longer have confidence in? Mr. Speaker, if the Prime Minister won't resign, will he at least give Conservative MPs on Thursday a free vote? Yeah. So Conservative MPs can decide for themselves whether the Prime Minister deliberately misled Parliament or was just so incompetent that he didn't even understand his own laws.
Mr. Speaker, I repeat what I've said earlier. I disagree profoundly with what he's just said, but I repeat my apology to the House and to the country.
Jake Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The people of Rossendale and Darwin will have weighed the words of the Prime Minister carefully, listening to them today, and they will, like me, feel that it is a contrite and wholehearted apology. They will also be looking at the action of the Prime Minister in Ukraine, and I wonder if he would consider putting Britain at the forefront of a new Marshall Plan to rebuild Ukraine after Putin has been defeated, and fund this in part by the assets confiscated by the British state from Russian oligarchs.
Can I thank my right honourable friend for his excellent suggestion? It's one, indeed, that the UK government is already pursuing, and in my conversations with President Zelensky, we did discuss exactly how the supporters and friends of Ukraine around the world can help to rebuild that beautiful country when the conflict is over.
Coulter.
Mr. Speaker, we've always known, haven't we, that he was only ever sorry because he was caught banged to rights. And this latest spin about the Met having it wrong is designed to bully the Met and to provide cover to his backbenchers that haven't got the bottle to sack him. But the country has already concluded that he's either a liar or an idiot.
Sorry. I said we want temperate language. When we have the motion on Thursday, that is a different matter. For today, we're not using language like that.
Well, I withdraw the word liar, Mr. Speaker, but the electorate will have already decided. But what everybody knows is that he is a lawbreaker. Yeah. So if the Met have got the wrong end of the stick, why doesn't he challenge these penalties before the criminal courts? Have his day in court.
I thank the honourable gentleman very much, and I just want to repeat what I said in my statement earlier, which is I fully respect the decision of the police.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
Does my right honourable friend have the power to authorise Sue Gray to publish her report in full? And if so, will he use that power in order to put an end to this matter so that we do not get diverted away, as we are being, from such crucial question as supplying armaments to Ukrainian Democrats?
I thank my right honourable friend very much, but I think it very important that the Met should conclude their investigation before the Sue Gray's final report.
Today marks the Prime Minister's 1000th day in office. It takes a particular type of Prime Minister to rack up as many catastrophic failures, scandals as U-turns as days on the job. From the Tory-made cost of living crisis, dodgy COVID contracts for his cronies, unlawfully proroguing Parliament, and now breaking the law. Enough is enough. So will the Prime Minister confirm if this 1000th day will be his last?
I might add to her list, Mr. Speaker. Nothing. Rolling out the fastest vaccine programme anywhere in Europe, Mr. Speaker. Thereby
will be his last. Now breaking the law.
Speaker, and leading the world in standing up to Putin, Mr. Speaker.
I can't hear so. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the Prime Minister coming here today and taking full responsibility and apologising. But it is very clear, Mr. Speaker, repeatedly President Zelensky has identified the Prime Minister as Ukraine's greatest ally. He's also been identified, I think, by President Putin as enemy number one. Does the Prime Minister agree that this isn't a bad accolade to have? And doesn't he also agree that months of psychodrama in here would play into the hands of the latter, not the former?
I think it's very important, Mr. Speaker, that the people of this country should understand. Although the country is faced with massive issues that we have to deal with, the aftershocks of COVID and the war in Ukraine, I in no way minimise the importance of the fine I have received, and I apologise wholeheartedly.
Mick Whitley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I think people across the House would agree that the situation in Ukraine is a very serious one, and there's no doubt we fully support what's going on and what we're trying to do. But setting that aside for a minute, the Prime Minister stands before us today as the first resident of number 10 to be found guilty of breaking the law while serving in public office. And while he's finally apologised today, it's been accompanied by the absurd caveat that the man who set the rules couldn't understand them. Will the Prime Minister concede that him remaining in office would deal a grievous blow to the rule of law in this country? And for the first time in his career, will he put the national interest before his personal ambition and resign?
Thank you very much. I repeat my apology. I direct him to what I've said earlier on, and I think what the people of this country need is us focusing on their issues and their priorities, and that's what the government is going to do.
Holly Membercroft.
Can I thank the Prime Minister for the update he's given this afternoon on the energy security strategy, and particularly for the support that this offers for steel. It is the latest in a long line of support that the Prime Minister has brought forward. It also sets out plans on wind, solar and nuclear. Does he agree with me that the best possible place to make the steel needed for these projects is right here in the UK?
Yes, and she is completely right, and that's why our energy security strategy is so absolutely vital, not just for consumers but also for British industry.
Richard Bergen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A new poll shows 3/4 of the public think the Prime Minister deliberately lied about breaking lockdown rules. Yet on Thursday, the Prime Minister will order his MPs to stop his law-breaking ever coming before the Privileges Committee. If the Prime Minister has nothing to hide, why doesn't he do the straightforward thing and refer himself to the Privileges Committee? What's the Prime Minister scared of?
Mr. Speaker, the House will decide.
It's not bad. Peter Bone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I thank the Prime Minister for coming to the House at the earliest opportunity to update us on this situation. On Thursday, sir, following your announcements this morning, this House has got to decide whether to refer the Prime Minister to the Privileges Committee. There is only one issue. Did the Prime Minister deliberately mislead the House? Could I ask the Prime Minister, did you deliberately mislead the House at the dispatch box?
No, Mr. Speaker.
Sammy Wilson.
Prime Minister, there will be millions of angry people across the United Kingdom today, even after the apology which has been given here today, who will still remain angry because of what they've gone through. But I think that any objective listener today will recognise that, for whatever reason, the apology given today was a genuine apology, and that we now need. And I would also remind the Prime Minister there are hundreds of thousands of unionists in Northern Ireland who are angry about other things as well that happened. But rather than focus on the past, I think it is important we focus on the future. And the Prime Minister has said that he discussed today the situation in Ukraine with world leaders. That situation is becoming very desperate. What discussions has he had about giving the appropriate weaponry to the Ukrainian forces so that they can drive back the Russians, liberate their country and avoid all of the consequences, whether it's in terms of our economy, oil or food for the rest of the world?
I thank him very much, and as he knows, the UK is in continuous discussion with the Ukrainians about what we can do to help them defend themselves, and a lot has gone, and a lot more will be going. While I'm at it, I want to pay tribute to a particular Northern Ireland business, used to be Short Brothers, now Thales, that has been absolutely indispensable, as he knows, in helping the Ukrainians against Russian armour.
John Barron.
Mr. Speaker, the government and British people have provided extensive support to Ukrainian refugees, but there remain in Afghanistan around 200 British Council contractors, many of whom are fleeing from the Taliban. I'm awaiting a meeting with the refugee minister, one that was promised back in November. Will he use his good offices to speed that meeting along?
I thank him very much, and yes, of course, and those 200 contractors for the British Council should, I believe, automatically be eligible, and certainly should be able to come under the scheme that we put in place, but I'll make sure he gets the meeting he wants.
Yeah. Chris Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As chair of the all-party group on Russia, I found it very difficult this Easter to have any faith seeing the barbarity meted out to the people of Ukraine. Women tortured, raped, their children tortured and raped, their menfolk, in many cases, their hands tied and then shot in the back of the head. All of these we know to be war crimes. But many of these worst atrocities are being committed by sociopaths working as mercenaries, paid for by the Russian government, by the Russian state, but nonetheless working as mercenaries. The UK still isn't a signatory to the Convention on Mercenaries. Isn't it time we put a stop to this terrible barbarity, not just in Ukraine, but in other places in the world where mercenaries from the Wagner Group operate with sociopathic intent?
I thank him very much, and I thank the right honourable. I will study his proposal on mercenaries, and I say to him that I think he's been right for a long time on Russia, and he's been vindicated.
Sir Geoffrey Clifton Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've heard the fulsome apology by the Prime Minister, but what he is doing is taking a lead in Ukraine, and what he needs to do, if I may suggest, is keep giving Ukraine defensive weapons so that we can eventually drag President Putin and the Russian Federation to a peace agreement, and then would he lead the world in gaining reparations so that that great country can be rebuilt again.
I thank him very much, and I thank him for his staunch position on Ukraine. He's completely right. I'm afraid that there is now no easy way of finding a diplomatic or a negotiated solution. I know the House would have preferred that, but I think it's going to be very difficult, as it were, to construct an off-ramp for Vladimir Putin. And we are now in a logic where we must simply do everything we can collectively to ensure that Vladimir Putin fails, and fails comprehensively, in Ukraine.
Mohammed Yassin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The majority of my constituents are sickened and furious that the Prime Minister broke the laws that they followed, putting their lives on hold, missing out on big life events, and even losing the chance to say goodbye to loved ones, to protect the NHS and save lives. Does the Prime Minister agree with my constituents, Robert, who believes that lawbreakers should not be lawmakers.
Mr. Speaker, I apologise profusely particularly to all those who lost loved ones, and I know how painful it has been. But I repeat what I've said. I believe that the job of the government now is to get on with delivering on the priorities of the country at a difficult time.
Brendan Clark-Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I know the Prime Minister has offered his wholehearted apology for the fixed penalty notice he received, which I very much welcome. But can I encourage the Prime Minister not to take any lectures from the Labour Party opposite, bearing in mind the number of FPNs their previous cabinet received? And yes, speed does kill. Yes. Or, of course, on this occasion, the FPNs that the Labour Party and SNP did not receive. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that everybody should be equal under the law?
Well, yeah, of course I agree with that, Mr. Speaker. But the issue here today, let's be frank, is what I did and what I got wrong, and I renew my apologies.
Dame Angela Riedel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister accepted the Health Secretary's resignation for breaking guidance, COVID guidance, not COVID laws. The Prime Minister then accepted Allegra Stratton's resignation for joking that the parties that were so frequent in Downing Street were actually a business event. He's now using her joke as his defence. Why is he holding himself to lower standards than he held the people whose resignations he accepted to?
Mr. Speaker, all I can say is that I apologise for what I got wrong, and I've explained to the House why I spoke in the House as I did. And what I want to do is to get on with the job of the government in taking this country forward, and that is what we're going to do.
Baker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I dare say that every member of this House can bring to mind their own John Robinson, perhaps several. And though you would not know it, I also think that most members of this House know that justice and mercy and humility also go hand in hand, a fact known by many who watch these proceedings too. In asking us to forgive him on behalf of all of those John Robinsons we represent, my right honourable friend could not have made a more humble apology. But what I want to say to him is that justice leading into mercy relies on a very, very old-fashioned concept, and that is repentance. What assurance can he give us that nothing of this kind will ever happen again?
I thank him for what he has said, and I am heartily sorry, as I have said, and I wish it had not happened, and I wish that things had been totally different. What I have already done, as the House will know, is taken steps to change the way we do things in number 10. But that in itself is not enough. I accept full responsibility myself for my actions.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister's supposed apology to the nation is pathetic. He told bereaved families in Downing Street last year that he had done everything possible to save their loved ones. Now he's been fined for breaking his own laws, illustrating just how soft the Tories have become on crime. And does the Prime Minister accept his words ring hollow for those of us who have lost the loved ones?
I repeat what I've said, and I know that the honourable gentleman has experienced bereavement during the pandemic, and I'm sorry for his loss, and I repeat my apologies for what happened in number 10.
Michael Fabrica.
Mr. Speaker, I was desperately sad to hear about my constituent John Robinson. My own best friend, his mother died in hospital, and he wasn't able to see her. And I do recall, of course, that the Prime Minister's mother also died during that COVID crisis. We've all suffered from these heart-wrenching tragedies, and none of us should forget it. But I just want to ask a quick question, if I may, regarding the Ukraine. The Prime Minister has announced that he's going to provide new modern mobile ground-to-air missile systems. How will we be able to train the Ukrainians during this war situation so that they can be put into use before it's too late?
I thank my right honourable friend, and I repeat my condolences to his friend. And I just to tell him on the Starstreak and other systems that we're using, that we're supplying to the Ukrainians. Ukrainians are now being trained, as he can imagine, outside the immediate theatre of conflict.
Murray Rimmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister genuinely doesn't seem to understand how he got his fine or what he did to break the law. He wrote, "What an utter nonsense." Does the Prime Minister understand that if a man is so incompetent that he can't understand his own rules, is he also a man who can't understand the public's challenges, the pace and scale of the soaring cost of living?
I thank her, and that's exactly why the government is focused on those issues. That's what we need to get on with. It's dealing with the aftershocks of COVID, the impact of the Ukrainian crisis on fuel prices and on inflation. That is where we are focused 100%.
Yes, someone needs to have the courage to get rid of the leader. The leader who is sitting in the Kremlin and causing the deaths of tens of thousands of innocent people. And maybe I only speak for myself, I say it in all humility. I'm not going to give the satisfaction of that death's head tyrant of removing a British Prime Minister who was given an apology, who was working night and day to save thousands of lives, and he went downstairs to thank his staff who were doing the same job. He has apologised. Let's show some compassion.
I thank him very much for what he has said. I just want to say one important thing. It is very, very important in this Ukrainian crisis that we do not make it an objective to remove the Russian leader or to change politics in Iran. This is about protecting the people of Ukraine. That is what we are doing. And Putin will try to frame it as a struggle between him and the West. We cannot accept that. This is about his brutal attack on the people of Ukraine.
Yeah, Antonia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Here we are again talking about the Prime Minister and his misdemeanours. It is frustrating for all of us on both sides of the House that we have to still be here. But the Prime Minister has led us this merry dance. Nobody else. The Prime Minister. Please, after all the apologies today, Prime Minister, resign, because we have had enough. The country deserves better.
Well, I thank her very much, and I must respectfully, if you'll forgive me, direct her to what I've already said.
Mark Pritchard.
Speaker, can I recognise the Prime Minister's contrition, humility and apology before the House today? Can I thank him as chair of the all-party parliamentary group on Ukraine for his leadership on Ukraine, and pass on the thanks of people cross-party from the Rada, the parliament in Ukraine, for his leadership over this conflict. And can I encourage him to steal the resolve and the resilience of our EU partners and NATO members that think perhaps if Putin gains the east of Ukraine and southern Ukraine, he will stop there. Is it not the case? He'll be reinvigorated and he will come back for Kiev and perhaps other NATO allies on another day.
Can I thank him very much for his, my honourable friend, for his clarity of thought and his own leadership on Ukraine, and I'm afraid he is entirely right that it is all too possible that Putin will acquire fresh momentum in the east, and we could see, I'm afraid, a resurgence of Russian attacks.
Joanna Cho.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. It's quite difficult to follow the Prime Minister's excuses, but I think what he's saying today is that he didn't think he was breaking any COVID rules because the gathering in respect of which he was fined was covered by a workplace exemption. If that is correct, then why did he pay the fixed penalty notice fine? Why didn't he refuse to do so and set out his defence in court? Can I suggest that he didn't do so because he was afraid of his track record to date before the courts of both this jurisdiction and indeed my own in Scotland? Because, Mr. Speaker, judges and juries, like our constituents, tend to have a pretty good handle on issues of credibility and reliability. So that's why the Prime Minister didn't take his chances with the court. Isn't that correct?
Mr. Speaker, I've explained that I believed that the event was in conformity with the rules. That has turned out not to be true. I humbly and sincerely accept that.
Robert Halford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Prime Minister for what he said in this House today. I think it will mean something to my constituents of Harlow. He mentioned that one of the great challenges that the government is facing is about the cost of living, and could he build on the work of the Chancellor in the spring statement to take further measures to cut the cost of living, perhaps either getting rid of the green levies that act as 25% of our energy bills, or at least introducing a downwards escalator, so when the international energy price goes high, the green levies would be reduced.
I thank him very much, and I know that he's campaigned assiduously for his constituents and for the whole country to reduce the burden, particularly of fuel costs. And I know that he will have been pleased by the Chancellor's, my right friend, the Chancellor's decision to cut 5p off fuel duty, a record cut. And I know that we will do more as soon as we can to help people with the cost of living.
Speaker, those of us who is the Prime Minister aware that those of us known him for a long time know that he spent his life apologising humbly, and those of us who know him don't dislike him or hate him, but we are waiting for signs that he's mending his ways, that he's changing how he operates. And can I just say, if he thinks that deflecting on to some of the good work he's done in Ukraine will balance what he said to this House, can I remind him he's got key links with Washington, I still have, but in Washington, in Berlin, in Paris, his behaviour here has really undermined his status and his credibility worldwide.
I thank him very much. I in no way wish to deflect from the gravity of the fine that I've received, and I want to stress again the apology, but I simply must disagree very profoundly with what he's just said.
Boris.
Mr. Speaker, I've heard the Prime Minister apologise countless times in this chamber today. I'm man enough to accept that, Mr. Speaker. But it's about a matter of trust. And this Prime Minister, I trusted him to see us through Brexit. He did. I trusted him to see us through the COVID epidemic. And bear in mind, he nearly died of it himself, and he did. And do you know something else? The whole world...
Just said, I've got to say it's got to be through the chair, not through the SNP, please. David Morris.
I totally agree, Mr. Speaker. But you know something else, Mr. Speaker, and this is the most important. This Prime Minister is leading the world against Putin's aggression in Ukraine. And the G7 leaders all respect him for that. And more to the point, so does President Biden. So I just want to say to this Prime Minister, will you carry on, please, leading this country?
I thank him very much. And the answer to that is yes, I will. But that in no way means that I wish to mitigate what the offence that I've been found guilty of, nor to in any way undermine the importance of my apology.
Alex Cunningham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My constituent Jason Green wrote to me today to tell me how his wife lost his mother suddenly last year, but couldn't travel to be with her father, who himself died 3 days later because they were following the law. They didn't get to the funerals either because they were abiding by the law. He doesn't forgive the Prime Minister. He says the apologies are too late and the Prime Minister should resign. What's he got to say to Jason and his family?
Well done.
I apologise again to not just to Jason but to the families of all those who lost loved ones during COVID, and I repeat what I've told the House earlier on.
Alan Cairns.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Prime Minister for his statement and for the way in which he made it. President Zelensky said yesterday that the conflict in Ukraine has moved to the second phase. Now, we all recognise that the balance between offensive and defensive weapons is very, very fine. As the conflict continues to develop, will my right honourable friend continue to review where that line stands?
Prime Minister. I thank him very much. He's asking an extremely important question, and the answer is that I don't think any NATO country, any Western country, wants to see its forces or its or our own weaponry directly engaged with Russia. What we want to see, that's to say, with the use of our own troops and personnel, but it is, I think, wholly legitimate and morally right to give the Ukrainians the equipment with which to protect themselves.
Jess Phillips.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has come here today, and to some respects I would have very much welcomed an entire statement about what has been happening in Ukraine, and it does feel a little bit like he seeks cover, which is shameful. But the truth of the matter is that on the cost of living crisis, on all the issues that we face both domestically and in foreign affairs, the fundamental of whether people can trust our politics matters. And if the people in this room do not ask for the Prime Minister to bear the rigour of the things that are put in place to ensure that leaders cannot mislead this House, if they don't walk through the lobby to do that, they are setting a dangerous precedent. So through you, Mr. Speaker, I won't speak to the Prime Minister, I speak to them. What I ask the Prime Minister is, shall I look forward to this same statement at the next fine? And to stretch the metaphor of the speeding fines, after 3 fines on the road for speeding, one has one's driving licence removed from them. So at what point in his fine history will he see sense?
I thank her very much, and I want to repeat what I've said already. I apologise for the fine I received. I can't comment about any hypothetical situations.
Robin Miller.
I know that many in Aberconwy have written to me about their upset at events, but I know that many in Aberconwy too will have heard the Prime Minister's apology today and will welcome it. I welcome it. Indeed, perhaps we all have a hope that there's forgiveness in our future and not just punishment for our past. I also welcome the fact that the Prime Minister talked about his obligations. So could he please update the House then on his commitment to strengthening the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, please?
I thank him very much. I thank him for all the work that he does to protect and support the Union with Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and as he knows, it's under a lot of pressure caused by the Northern Irish Protocol, which I believe is undermining the balance of the Good Friday Agreement, and we will have to sort it out, Mr. Speaker.
There's Civil Roberts.
Prime Minister debases himself, he debases his office, he debases his government, and he debases those who seek to defend him. He is a millstone round his party's neck. The Welsh Government's, Welsh Conservatives' 18-page local election manifesto makes zero reference to the Prime Minister. They don't appear, like a number of his own backbenchers, to want to be associated with him. Can he explain why?
Mr. Speaker, I think what they probably want to have in Wales is better government and to avoid and I would think they're campaigning for the investment in the NHS that I'm afraid both Welsh Labour and the Plaid Cymru have failed to deliver.
Natalie Elphie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Prime Minister for his fulsome apology today. Given that, does the Prime Minister agree that the priority for this House and this government must be the very real challenges facing our country, particularly the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the cost of living pressures caused by COVID and worsened by Russia's war on Ukraine? And coming from Poland last week, helping with Ukrainian child refugees, may I pass on the widespread respect and admiration with which his leadership on Ukraine is held.
Can I thank her very much for what she has been doing to help refugees in Poland, and we talked about it the other day. I know many other members across the House are doing the same, and I thank them all.
Lloyd Russell-Moyle.
Mr. Speaker, I share the Prime Minister's thoughts on Ukraine. Over Easter, my constituents collected the morning after pill to send to Ukraine for women who are being raped by Russian forces. But their disgust and their admiration about what is Britain's role in that does not dampen their anger at the Prime Minister's actions. You know, it was not just the crime, but it was the lie, obfuscation and the fake apologies that got...
No, I decide. No, I'm sorry, you can't take my job. You're the backbencher, I'm in the chair. Just, we don't use the word lie. I've explained that earlier, and I stand by it. So I'm sure that you'll withdraw it immediately.
The sentence is not about the Prime Minister, but I will withdraw it if you don't like the word. Those are the things that got Jeffrey Archer, Fiona Onasanya, and Chris Huhne kicked out of this place or forced to resign. Now, of course, I have no hope on his front benchers who are tax-dodging, Russian, financed snowflakes, but I do have higher hopes for his backbenchers. So how many backbenchers' credibility should be destroyed in supporting the Prime Minister?
Can I just say, let's try and see if we can keep it temperate and moderate. There was no individual mention, so therefore it was within. Not what I would expect, but that's where we are. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I heard what he said. I don't agree with it, and nor do I agree with what he said about the front bench.
David Simmons.
Mr. Speaker, I was lucky in that on Saturday night I got to hold the hand of my father-in-law as he died of complications of COVID. So I understand the anger that many people feel and the challenge that we all face when it comes to the credibility of our government and the good actions of this Conservative government, which I support. And I have to ask my right honourable friend what steps he has in mind to restore the moral authority of this government.
Mr. Speaker, I think the best thing that the government can do is to continue to deliver on the promises that we made to the British people, and that is what we're doing.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The respected constitutional historian, Lord Peter Hennessy, reminds us that it is the Prime Minister who is the guardian of the ministerial code. What can we do to protect that code when the person who is entrusted with guarding it breaks that code and its overarching duty to comply with the law and becomes, in the words of Lord Hennessy, a rogue Prime Minister?
Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, I don't agree with that characterisation, and I've explained to the House why I spoke as I did, and I've explained and I've apologised for the mistake that I made.
Oh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents in Sedgefield have expressed both their satisfaction at how we are helping the people of Ukraine, but also their frustration and anger at events in Number 10. They also believe that one is not linked to the other. His contrition over his error is welcome, and I thank him for it. And whilst it was a clear error of judgment, I certainly do not believe it's a resigning matter. If it was, then regardless of Ukraine, it still would be. I, like many, have missed a funeral of a close friend, but I would still have missed that funeral, regardless of the PM's error, because the rules were correct, and his error does not change that. As regards Ukraine, though, could I please encourage him to continue his efforts with full vigour?
I thank him very much, and I share I understand the frustration and the anger of his constituents in Sedgefield, and I understand perfectly how they feel. I renew my apologies to them, and I also share what he has to say about Ukraine.
Stella Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The benches opposite have talked about repentance. The Prime Minister has offered us his apology. We're being asked to move on. But there's a critical question for all of us as to whether the Metropolitan Police have moved on from this matter. Now, the Prime Minister says that he cannot deal with hypotheticals. But now it has occurred to him what a party actually is. Can he tell us whether he expects more fines to come, yes or no?
I would love to give more commentary on this, but I've told the House very clearly that I can't do that until the investigation is complete.
Rob Butler.
Mr. Speaker, the Deputy Head of the Ukrainian President's Office has said that the UK is the leader in defence support for Ukraine, the leader in the anti-war coalition, the leader in sanctions against the Russian aggressor. So with Russia's offensive in the Donbass beginning the next stage of Putin's appalling invasion, can my right honourable friend assure me that the UK will remain the leader of international efforts to support Ukraine, including persuading all our friends and allies of the need to stand up to Putin's outrageous actions?
I thank him very much, and I know that the whole House will want, and I think that the unity on this has been important, will want the UK government to continue to take that role, and we certainly will.
Colin Eastwood.
People across these islands had to watch through care home windows as their loved ones died. Parents had to bury their children without the comfort of their family around them. While that was happening, the Prime Minister and the Chancellor were partying in Downing Street. We know he has no respect for the public, but can he show us that he has some respect, just a little bit of respect for himself, and please, please, please resign now.
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman, and I understand the feelings of his constituents, but I must direct him to what I've said earlier on.
Jacob Young.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome the Prime Minister's renewed focus on nuclear energy and its power to transform our energy independence? Does he also recognise we don't just need energy independence, but also independence in our foundation industries like chemicals and steel?
Yes, indeed. Can I congratulate my honourable friend on his recent marriage, by the way, Mr. Speaker, and say that we certainly see nuclear energy as of vital importance, and as well, of course, as investing in new technologies, which is why we are putting record investments into our R&D, £22 billion, Mr. Speaker.
Nadine Whittam. Nadine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister broke the laws that he made, laws to protect public health, then repeatedly misled Parliament. Does the Prime Minister agree that comments made by his Northern Ireland Secretary this morning, comparing his fine to a parking ticket, are insulting? And when will he do what the majority of this country wants and resign?
I thank her. I in no way minimise the importance of the fine I have received, as I've said several times this afternoon.
Richard Drax.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We all have our faults, Mr. Speaker, and I'm sure the Prime Minister would agree that he has his share of his own. But he also has many attributes, and one of them is courage. And it took courage to go to Ukraine, to stand up for freedom, and for those people who have been subjected to barbarism. I must take this opportunity to ask my right honourable friend, will he review the cuts to our armed forces and ensure that the future of this country is invested in to meet this future and very real threat?
I thank my honourable friend, who is a valiant campaigner for the armed forces in all their guises, and quite rightly, Mr. Speaker, and it's partly thanks to the lobbying of himself and others like him that we've increased defence spending by record sums, £24 billion, and that has enabled us, helped us greatly in helping our Ukrainian friends.
Barbara Keeley.
Speaker, a constituent wrote to me about his feelings about the Downing Street parties. Good Friday was the second anniversary of the death of his wife, a healthcare assistant at Bolton Hospital who died from COVID. Over the 10 days she was ill, he was not able to go with her to hospital or visit her until just before she died. After she died, he had to plan her funeral alone. There was no wake, and after the funeral he had to go back to an empty home with no support from family and friends. Now, it's clear that the party opposite wants to move on, but since his wife died, my constituent tells me he has been unable to work, or to move on, or to grieve. I want to ask my constituents questions to the Prime Minister directly. I followed the law to the letter. Why does the government think the laws don't apply to them?
I want to say again how sorry I am for the loss of her constituent, and I apologise to him personally and to his family, all those who lost loved ones. And it's a measure of the seriousness with which I take this today. Of course, we think that the law applies to us. Of course it does.
Catherine West.
At high altitude, one nose starts to bleed. With the rise in national insurance, more tax than for 70 years, our constituents are crying out for help, whether it's with their energy bills, whether it's with the rents, which have gone up by at least 20% in some parts of my constituency. And yet we will be facing this sort of debate day after day after day until the Prime Minister faces up to responsibility and resigns, or the members here take him out. That is the choice until we actually start focusing on the things which matter.
May I respectfully say to her, I think the real choice that this government, this House of Commons should follow is getting on with the job of serving the people that we are elected to serve and helping them with the cost of living. That's what we're doing.
Carol Monaghan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister's questions on Wednesday, the 8th of December, the Prime Minister said there was no party and no COVID rules were broken. Today, he refers to his law-breaking as a mistake. Can the Prime Minister explain to my constituents, and indeed to children across these aisles, what the difference is between a lie and a mistake?
Mr. Speaker, I've apologised deeply for what I got wrong, and I've explained to the House why I spoke as I did on that occasion and others.
Wayne David.
Many references have been made to the views of the electorate of this country, and I can tell him that those views are shared by my constituents as well. So I would ask the Prime Minister, is he prepared to take a truth detection test after every Prime Ministerial statement?
I don't know whether the honourable gentleman is being serious, Mr. Speaker, but I spoke in all good faith to the House, and I'll continue to do so.
Stephen Farry.
I do wonder what continued purpose the Prime Minister sees for the Ministerial Code, given the frequency with which it's seemingly broken with impunity. And how can the UK be a credible leader for liberal democratic values around the world whenever basic norms of accountability are thrown aside to save the skin of one man?
The answer to that question is staring him in the face if he looks at what is happening around the world, Mr. Speaker. And the UK is continuing to provide moral, political, diplomatic leadership as well as military support, and that is what we will continue to do.
Justin Mathers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister would have us believe he didn't knowingly break the law, and many of my constituents will have difficulty accepting that. But if we are to suspend belief for a minute, based on the Prime Minister's own words, he's telling the world he didn't know what the rules were. So I ask him, does he think someone who doesn't understand the laws they are bringing in is fit to lead this country?
I thank him very much. I've explained why I thought that the event was within the rules. I apologise very sincerely.
John Morrow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many Newcastle Central residents have contacted me to share precious moments missed, charging me to hold the Prime Minister to account. They don't accept his apology because, Mr. Speaker, you see, they thought long and hard about the difficult decisions they had to make, weighing up the huge personal costs versus the terrible consequences of spreading the virus. They made the right decision. The Prime Minister didn't, apparently because he is too stupid to understand his own regulations. Yep. So if he is so much stupider than my constituents, how can he claim to lead them and the nation.
I thank her constituents very much for what they did throughout the pandemic, and it's thanks to people up and down the country who followed the rules that we've been able to defeat COVID, or beat it back in the way that we have, and I apologise heartily for what I got wrong.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I, like so many others in this place, I'm sure, are profoundly proud of the way in which the people of this country stood together, showed the commitment and the resolve that they did throughout the COVID crisis, and now are facing a cost of living crisis. And on top of all of that, have thrown their 100% support behind the people of Ukraine. But it breaks my heart, Mr. Speaker, that they have been so badly let down by the person they looked to lead them with the same sort of commitment and honour as they have shown. So I would ask whether the Prime Minister recognises that no apology, however heartfelt, however genuine, can make up for that loss of faith, and that perhaps it's time he recognises that the people of this country deserve better.
I thank her very much, and I think that and I understand completely the feelings of people about COVID, about what they did, and about the failings in number 10. But I think that the job of the government is to get on and deliver for those very people now facing the cost of living crisis that she describes, and that is what we're going to do.
Vicky Foxcroft.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, I personally found that apology shocking. People have lost loved ones and haven't been able to attend their funerals. My BTEC tutor in performing arts, Martin Cosgrave, sadly passed away from COVID. He saw something in the young me, who many felt was destined for nothing, and encouraged me to attend university. He was a fantastic man and is deeply missed by all his students. In the word of one of his friends, we were his children, yet none of us were able to attend his funeral. So what does the Prime Minister say to all of Martin's former students from Accrington and Rosendale College who were unable to mark the passing of this influential man?
Well, he sounds like a remarkable man, Mr. Speaker. I'm very sorry for her loss and for the loss of all the pupils that she mentions.
Deirdre Brock.
Speaker, we've heard rightly from benches opposite about the barbaric nature of Putin's aggressive attitudes towards the Ukraine, but nothing about his party returning the donations they've received from friends of Putin. When can we hear about that?
Thank you very much. All donations are registered in the normal way.
Christian Matheson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honourable gentleman from Sedgefield said that he felt these issues weren't linked, but I have to disagree. We support Ukraine because we support democracy, we support self-determination and the international rules-based order. Does the Prime Minister not understand that when we go across to other countries and ask them to follow a rules-based order, they will now simply say, you don't follow your own rules, mate, so why should we follow the rules that you want us to follow? He is undermining this country and our reputation abroad.
On the contrary, Mr. Speaker, I believe that people abroad can see how closely our leaders and our rulers are held to account, and that's exactly what we're fighting for and helping the Ukrainians to defend.
Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In yet another shameless episode, the Prime Minister comes here and he says, I'm sorry I was caught, but there's a war in Ukraine, a cost of living crisis that his government's done nothing to alleviate. Is it not the case that if you've to believe the argument that this law-breaking, incompetent Prime Minister is the best the UK can rely on during this time in crisis for Ukraine and the cost of living, that then that's a metaphor for the UK that he's a figurehead of and that it's time for him to go?
I think the most important thing is we focus on the priorities of the people of this country in Scotland and around the country and tackle the aftershocks of COVID, the effects of the war in Ukraine and the impact on inflation, and that's what we're doing.
You're busy. Sarah Jones.
Speaker, does the Prime Minister think that he broke the law?
I completely accept that the police are right, and that's why I paid the fine.
Florence Eshelami.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At every stage, the Prime Minister's given the House and the public a different account and version of what happened, until more revelations forced him to change his mind. The Prime Minister's outlined the fact that he's sorry. The Prime Minister should be sorry because he almost died from this disease, and the staff in the St Thomas's Hospital, my constituency, treated him. They didn't have a party for 9 minutes. Does the Prime Minister not understand that he's the distraction in terms of the constituents that write to me with issues around cost of living, the crisis in Ukraine? Yeah. Will the Prime Minister do the decent thing and stop that distraction by resigning?
I think the best, the most decent thing we can all do is help our constituents with the issues that matter most to them, and she's mentioned, I think, the number 1 and number 2 issues.
Debbie Abrahams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, trust and confidence in our democracy is at an all-time low. Does the Prime Minister accept his part in that lack of confidence and trust? And shouldn't we also be putting the ministerial code on a statutory footing, underpinned by the Nolan principles in the same way that it is in the devolved governments?
I thank her, but I want to repeat what I said earlier on, which is I think that there couldn't be a clearer expression of the robustness of our democracy, that all of us must be held to account. I've been held to account. I apologise very sincerely.
Matt Weston.
Speaker, the public will be appalled by the Prime Minister's statement, because not only during the pandemic did he make virtually every night a statement to the nation, but the government that he leads also spent hundreds of millions of taxpayers' pounds on advertising campaigns demanding the public follow the rules. One featured a woman in intensive care on a ventilator. The Prime Minister must have seen it. It said, "Look me in the eyes and tell me you never bend the rules." 3 months ago, I reminded him of this and asked him to explain himself. He told me to wait until after the police investigation. They now have. It's clear he bent the rules. He's taken the public for fools, isn't he?
Yeah.
Mr. Speaker, I apologise again. I thank the public very much for what they did, and they, by their collective action, have helped us to keep COVID at bay, and I thank them very much.
Timms.
Mr. Speaker, but giving an apology and then carrying on is not being held to account. Does the Prime Minister recognise that there is a very serious problem for the long term in leaving a lawbreaker in charge of the lawmakers?
Mr. Speaker, I've said what I've said, and I apologise, and I want to say again to the House that when I spoke before in this chamber about events in Downing Street, I spoke in good faith.
Pete Wishaw.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister spent less than 2 minutes addressing his law-breaking in the statement he just made to the House just now. That's less, somewhat less than the fulsome account that he promised for the last few weeks. And the one thing that our constituents wanted to hear was a resignation statement, not any more of these mealy-mouthed apologies. And the public will be astounded that the word that they now most associate with him, we can't use to describe him in this House. The country knows where he is. We know where he is. I think the Prime Minister even knows where he is. Will he now, for the sake of this country, just go?
I thank you very much, and I repeat what I've said earlier on. I apologise, and I direct him to my earlier statement.
Dr. Rupa Hutt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Margot from Acton turns 5 on Saturday. We were talking at an Easter service over the break. She wanted me to ask the Prime Minister, will he come to her party? And her parents, in common with the majority of our nation, look at any opinion poll, think that he should signal his intention to step down today. So to spare the embarrassment of the local election results, of further fines to come, he can't rule out further fines, the even more boozy parties, much worse than ambushed by a cake. Can he do both? And that way, he's got able deputies. He can have something nice to look forward to at the weekend where there will be no illegality.
I thank her very much for her kind invitation. I don't know whether Margot herself wants to extend the invitation, but I'm afraid I'll be busy doing what we're doing and getting on with delivering on the priorities of the British people.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Lord Denning said, no matter how high you are, the law is above you. Isn't it time to go, Prime Minister?
And I agree very much with Lord Denning, and that's why I apologise in the way that I do.
Brendan O'Hara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And reading the Prime Minister's apology, can I say on behalf of the people of Argyll and Bute, is that it? Yeah. And it's no wonder I've been inundated with emails from constituents who believe the Prime Minister has been treating them like fools. Typical of the emails I've received is one from Cathy in Helensburgh this morning, who described the Prime Minister, and I quote, a self-serving, truth-twisting charlatan. Of course, I would never use such language in this place, but Cathy's assessment is absolutely correct. And does he recognise this to be a widely held view of his character?
Yeah. It does. Sorry, I've asked for moderate and temperate language. That's not a clever way of getting around it, and I've just asked him to think long and hard before we do that again, and that might be a warning to others. And I'm sure he'd like to withdraw the way he put it.
Mr. Speaker, with respect to yourself and the Chair, I withdraw the remarks that I made.
Well, in that case, Mr. Speaker, I humbly remind him of the apology that I've given.
Stephen Kinnock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister's case for his defence seems to be based on it being impossible for him to resign because of the Ukraine war. But his entire parliamentary party, from where his replacement would be drawn, are united around the government's position on Ukraine. And of course, there are numerous examples of Conservative members of Parliament moving against leaders such as Margaret Thatcher in 1990 and Chamberlain in 1940. So could the Prime Minister please explain to the House why he specifically and individually has to carry on as Prime Minister at this time? Surely it's not because he thinks this House trusts him to do so.
He asked an elaborate question. Let me give a simple answer. I've apologised. I continue to apologise. What I want to do is get on with the job.
Sir Mark Hendrick.
Speaker, can the Prime Minister tell us when he's going to stop this dissembling, distracting and deflecting and start telling the truth to this House?
Mr. Speaker, at all times I've spoken in good faith of this House.
Mr. Speaker, this is the first Prime Minister in office to make and break his own rules for committing lockdown offences. Neil Ferguson resigned from SAGE and Catherine Caldwood quit as Scotland's Chief Medical Officer, both for breaking COVID rules. They realised that action speaks louder than words, and they took responsibility. Why is it right for them to resign and not for the Prime Minister?
I thank you very much, and I repeat the apology that I've given.
Mike Ainsbury.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has broke the law, guilty as charged. The law that many people up and down our shores abided by, never had the opportunity to say goodbye to loved ones. The Prime Minister also misled this House over and over again, misled the public over and over again. Does the Prime Minister actually believe in a ministerial code? Is it worth the paper it's written on?
Well, Mr. Speaker, let me repeat my apologies for what I've got wrong and what went wrong in Downing Street, and also my explanation for why I've spoken as I have in this House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Originally, there was one party, and the Prime Minister told the House that he had been assured that there was no party. It then turned out that there were parties, but he wasn't in attendance. He then had to tell the House that he had, in fact, attended parties. He told the House that he'd been assured on each occasion of the truth of what he said. So someone must have committed a serious breach of their responsibilities to advise the Prime Minister in a way that led to him coming to this House and inadvertently misleading the House. What's happened to those people?
Mr. Speaker, I've apologised for what I've got wrong, and I take full responsibility for everything that happened in number 10. And Mr. Speaker, for the rest of his question, he must wait for the completion of the investigation.
Zara Sultan.
Energy bills are soaring, wages are falling, and the cost of living crisis is getting worse and worse. But while my constituents are forced to choose between heating and eating, the Chancellor is benefiting from the non-dom tax loophole, and 17 of the Prime Minister's 22 cabinet members have refused to deny whether they or their families benefit from tax havens or non-dom status. They're laughing in our faces while robbing the public purse. So I ask the Prime Minister, how many more children need to go hungry at night before he stops putting the greed of his super rich mates before the needs of ordinary people?
Sorry. Can't you withdraw on robbing the public purse? That's just not the case.
Oh, withdraw it.
Yes.
Withdraw it.
Steve McCabe.
Mr. Speaker, if the Downing Street photographer is a publicly funded post, does that mean all the photographs of the Downing Street parties are public property and should be available for access?
Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to comment on the investigation until it's complete.
Andy MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Truth and honesty matter, and the Prime Minister has repeatedly told this House that all guidance, all rules were observed. That isn't true. He also told this House that there were no parties. Indeed, his Chancellor also said that he hadn't attended a party.
Yes.
Neither of those things are true. So, for once in his privileged, entitled life, will he do the decent thing, come to that dispatch box and correct the record? Because there isn't anybody who's fooled by this, but what he continues to do is to take the British people for fools, and they will not put up with it.
Yes.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank you very much, but I want to repeat what I've said about the event in question, for which I've received an FP, and I apologise heartily for that, and it was my mistake entirely. I thought it was within the rules, and it has turned out not to be the case. As for other events, I'm afraid I'm going to have to stick by what I've said previously and await, and I hope he will allow me, await for the conclusion of the investigation.
Alison Thula.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I got many emails from my constituents over the weekend. One of these has stuck with me. It's from Victoria, who worked in respiratory wards during the COVID-19 pandemic. She says, I've watched people die alone, sick and confused, begging us to see their family one last time, with only us to hold their hands and comfort them. I've watched family members banging on the locked doors, ward doors, crying, screaming and pleading for us to let us hold their dying loved ones. We were the ones that watched this and enforced this. We were the ones who had to tell families how sorry we were, but the government guidelines meant they couldn't hug their families one last time. Victoria says the time for apologies are over. We don't accept them. When will the Prime Minister resign?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank her for what she's said, but I want to remind her of what I've already said, which is I feel the greatest sorrow and grief for those like Victoria who have lost loved ones during the pandemic. Mr. Speaker, I understand the pain that they must feel and the anger that they must feel, and I repeat my apologies.
Paula Barker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The fact the Prime Minister and the Chancellor have both been fined for breaking the very rules they themselves set means they are either incompetent or they think the people of our country are beneath them. Either way, and with the prospect of further fines looming for the Prime Minister, they are not fit to occupy the two highest offices in the land. My constituents of Liverpool Wavertree have overwhelmingly told me, Mr. Speaker, that they do not believe their apologies to be sincere. So the question from my constituents of Liverpool Wavertree is when can they expect your resignations?
I thank her, and I can't, Mr. Speaker, offer any further commentary on the investigation. All I can do is renew and repeat the apologies that I've given to her constituents, whether they accept them or not.
Dave Dugan.
Speaker,
Only this Prime Minister could have, together with his staff, laughed up their sleeve, believing they were above the law, and demonstrated to an entire country that they're beneath the public's respect, more accurately. And vacuous self-congratulations from the Tory opposite about the role that this government is playing in Ukraine are a disservice to the servicemen and women who are actually in country doing the spade work, protecting democracy. And to use the bloodshed of the fallen Ukrainians as some sort of political cover to keep this Prime Minister in office is an utter disgrace, but no less than my Angus constituents have come to expect. This government is compounding the cost of living crisis, but we are led to believe that that, together with the Ukraine crisis, is why we must endure this Prime Minister. So let me test his knowledge. What anti-ship missiles will his government be sending to Ukraine? And if he can't answer that simple question, will he resign?
Well, I'm grateful to him, Mr. Speaker. But one of the systems that we're looking at, since he asks, is to see if we can mount some brimstones on the back of technicals to see if that will do the job, Mr. Speaker. But there are other options that I don't want to discuss.
Martin Docker to use.
Mr. Speaker, let me first of all wish the Prime Minister good luck in their trip to India, where I'm sure he will raise the ongoing arbitrary detention of Jagtar Singh Johal with Prime Minister Modi. But that said, if the Prime Minister believes that they inadvertently misled the House based on evidence given at the time, surely the Prime Minister would then agree with me and also with Alex Macy of The Spectator that such a defence rests on the proposition that the Prime Minister is an idiot.
I've spoken in good faith, Mr. Speaker, and of course continue to raise the case of his constituent.
Flynn.
Does he believe that a Prime Minister of the United Kingdom who openly treats the public like they are mugs is a help or a hindrance to the cause of Scottish independence?
I believe the biggest help to the cause of the Union is the incompetence of the Scottish Nationalist government.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The whole functioning of this place hangs on the belief that everyone behaves in an honourable way at all times. Unfortunately, the people that matter out there don't believe that we do. We now know that 72% of them think the Prime Minister is part of the problem. For 72% of the citizens of these four nations, they cannot hear the two words Boris and Johnson without immediately hearing a word that I'm not allowed to say on their behalf. Is the Prime Minister really going to look my constituents in the eye and tell them that the best future they can hope for is a future under a Prime Minister whose character and conduct can only be described in words that are banned from use in this place?
I think the best future for the people of Scotland is to continue with the United Kingdom that has served this country well for hundreds of years and whose role is valued around the world, perhaps never more than in the last few months.
It's not a new member for the SNP. Jeff Smith.
I couldn't find the space. It was so busy, Mr. Speaker. The event in question happened on the 19th of June 2020. 2 days later, on the 21st, my constituent Stephen's partner died of cancer at home. In the weeks before that, she was in hospital, and Stephen said, when she needed me most, I was told I could not visit her because of the no visitors rule. In the texts I received from her, it was obvious that she needed somebody to just talk to and hold her hand. Stephen obeyed the rules, and like so many people, he thinks the Prime Minister should stand down, but the defence from the Conservative backbenchers seems to be he can't resign because we have a crisis in Ukraine. So does the Prime Minister think he's the only person on the Conservative benches that's capable of leading the country through a crisis?
Mr. Speaker, sincerely too, I think he said the name of his constituent was Stephen, and to his family for what we got wrong, what I got wrong during the pandemic, and the event for which I've apologised today. But I think the best thing we can do, and I've said what I've said about how I've spoken in this House. But the best thing we can do is get on now with delivering for the people of this country, up and down this country, getting us through the pandemic, getting us through the aftershocks of COVID, as I say, as we got people through the pandemic.
Yeah.